Three, two, one, action.
Well, let me tell you something, brother.
Hello and welcome to episode 13 of the Wrestling and Film podcast. And I am your host, the one, the only, the man, the myth, the legend. I am none of those things, but I'm just going to say I am Hamza Hussein. Welcome. Yeah, we have yet another A&E WWE special today. I'm interviewing the one I interviewed, the one and only Robert Liano, an acclaimed filmmaker who has directed series like the Netflix series First Team Juventus, for those of you who are interested in soccer or football. He's done, various things with like documentaries on Frank Shamrock, MMA legend Frank Shamrock, among other projects. So, and now obviously I'm here to talk about his very recent documentary, the A&E biography on the legendary Dusty Rhodes, which released last Sunday, and I was blown away by the film. I don't know if anybody hasn't seen it. I really highly encourage you to watch it, because from an emotional standpoint, this may have been the one of the highest and one of the most emotional WWE biographies, possibly in the 3 seasons. It was so touching, and it's very much built around and told through the family. So the children, Cody Rhodes, Dustin Rhodes, and the sisters, Kristen and Teal, as well as, of course, Dusty's wife. They are the driving forces of the story, and on more than one occasion, there is tears. There is just genuine lump in your throat moments. And if for nothing else, that just it blew me away, and it really made me feel. Because as Rob tells me in this interview, wrestling is wrestling, but everybody can relate to family, father, son dynamics and things of that nature. And that's what really carried this through into, I mean, it took it to another level. And that was all Rob's doing. Rob was very adamant to do that, take that avenue and take that direction for the story, and it worked like a treat. So I'm really excited for you guys to hear this chat. I don't want to waste a lot of time on this introduction. I want you to hear the chat that I had with Robert Liano. It is wonderful. He was so giving, so gracious, just great. Gave us so much insight into creating this, working with Cody. When he first reached out to Cody, what was going on with Cody leaving AEW? What are the odds? Getting Dustin on board, what they wanted, what they didn't want, what the original opening of the film was supposed to be like other directors, how long the original cut was and how much he had to cut to make the kind of 2-hour TV slot. Just so much, and what Rob has taken away from this experience. It's just really beautiful stuff that Rob shared, and also some really insightful and some funny stuff. So without further ado, enjoy, baby, the Dusty Rhodes A&E conversation. Hey, Rob.
How's it going?
I'm good. How are you doing, my friend?
Excellent. Thank you.
How's everything been since the release? And congratulations, by the way, because it was a fantastic documentary. I sincerely mean that. Very, very emotional.
You're so kind. I mean, it's really been fun to hear, people's feedback, and I feel like so honored, to have the chance to tell the story, but to actually not get a ton of every decision had this struggle of how can we do this without DDP, or how can we do this without Harley, people are, I think it just says a lot about Dusty. People are just happy he got some light, and the family thing was super stoked.
Yeah, no, it worked. And then if there was ever a doubt, like I know you don't come from like the wrestling world, so if there was ever a doubt about how it would appeal to the wrestling fans, I think that could be put to rest because it hit home.
Which is great. Happy accident.
Yeah. I mean, that's always really a curious thing for me, like when people who come completely removed from the wrestling space, like no connection, no understanding or knowledge of it, but they're suddenly like hop in and do a project like this. That's always really fascinating to me, like how people are drawn in like that. Like, did you ever feel like a project like this would ever cater to your like sensibilities as a filmmaker?
Well, it's interesting you say that. I had a huge amount of anxiety about, coming in on something where people are so passionate and so knowledgeable, and there's so much history. There's so many important characters and moments along the way. And I quickly learned as I started making, I was reading Dusty's book and, reading about matches and going through old matches, and I'm trying to make a timeline of these like key moments. And all of a sudden it was like, I'd had 35 matches, written down. And as like, A&E, to their, they come at this with not, they're very committed to wrestling and they're very committed to WWE, but they also want it not to be all wrestling and all in ring. So, I knew that my sensibilities were going to, skew more their way, but I wanted to make sure to like, make sure I was buttoned up on the wrestling. But very quickly it was like, I had 30 matches and I had only gotten to, 88 or something. And I was like, well, this is not going to work. And that's when I kind of took a step back and said, what's the real story here with Dusty, and between his book, which is great, but it leaves out a huge part of his life, and it's also like his sort of, maybe true, maybe not perspective. And then, the previous WWE docs, which, lean very heavy into, the Dustin, Gold Dust, drama, and took a, pretty clear view on. And I said, wait a minute, like there's 4 kids here. Like the guy's a dad. And, if they all have an equal 25% of the relationship of his kids. And so I tried to lean into that. And there was a fair amount of, resistance from many different places to that idea, because how could you take this, legendary, epic, iconic figure and like not tell the story through, Tony Schiavone and, you're not going to talk to Ted DiBiase? Like what? Like, and it was like, well, no.
Yeah,
So,
that is, I'm surprised there was resistance, because obviously it's still Cody and Dustin that are leading the pack there as well.
well, when I say resistance, it was a risk. It was a risk to try to take this angle. And I think some people thought, why would you want to take that risk when you have this, pot of gold of great Dusty moments and wrestling stories and all these big wrestling characters? And I just felt like, well, the combination of what I know how to do, which is tell real stories about real people that, you can relate to, and it doesn't matter if they're a golfer or a musician or a wrestler. We all can relate to brothers and sisters and moms and dads,
Yeah.
and, making money and surviving and those trade-offs and stuff. So I wanted to, I'm sorry, I just got to turn these.
Oh, no, you're fine.
So it was just, it wasn't resistance to the idea, like, oh, don't include the family. It was more like, do you want to take this risk? Like, why take this risk that might pay off when, there seems to be a more traditional way that is filled with tons of great stuff. And I think that's the unique opportunity with A&E and WWE. It's a chance to come in and look at wrestling through a little bit of a different lens.
Yeah.
And you know, I watched a few of the previous ones, and some of them, I mean, a lot of them have been very, very good. You know, Roddy Piper, I mean, that episode was incredible. Bret
Yeah.
Hart, that was great, you know, but very few of them do you get real insight into the families.
Hmm.
And I think if they were willing to do it, which they were also not 100% sure about, that it made sense.
Yeah. No, it worked. And I remember speaking a couple of years ago. I spoke to I'm not sure if you're familiar with Dark Side of the Ring. It's a documentary series.
Mhm.
Yeah, they Evan Husney, one of the creators, he said they're big wrestling fans, but they were like, we're telling stories about wrestlers, but we're telling the human stories. So they just happen to be wrestlers. And that's very much like what you've done here with Dusty. It's a guy who's just happens to be a wrestler, but he is a guy chasing his dreams, an inspiration to people, and ultimately a father and a son. And that, to me, it worked. I mean, I think I come at it from both sides. I'm a film fan, but I'm also a huge wrestling fan. But it caters perfectly because as a wrestling fan, I've seen the wrestling stuff. I kind of know that. I know that to an extent. This stuff I don't know, or to the level of detail that you go into, and that's what really touches you.
Yeah, you know, I think it's interesting. Dark Side of the Ring is a great example because they bring a perspective that you don't see or you haven't heard, or this, you know, untold story. But it also skews sometimes a little sensational, right? It's a little over dramatized or whatever. And I think that was one of the concerns of the family. You know, that I think Cody didn't want the same, you know, Dusty story told. He left Dustin behind, and Dustin became a drug addict. And I think Dustin didn't want that story told because he didn't think, you know, all of his struggles were necessarily material to his dad's life story. And I think finding that balance that didn't sensationalize it, but tried to tell it honestly by honoring the way it's been told in the past, but recognizing what it's left us today in the present, which is like really remarkable. You know, it's like Dustin being, you know, still in the business and healthy and clean and a grandfather, and Cody, you know, assuming his position. And, you know, it says a lot about Dusty.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's funny you mentioned his book. I was listening to his book, and there's a line in there in one of the early chapters. He says, "Professional wrestling is the thing that brings out the very best in a human and also the very worst." And I feel like the way you've done, I mean, I know I don't assume you did this intentionally, and this is my perception, but the two tales of the older kids and the younger kids, in a way, almost show like, and not in a way of slating Dusty, but the best and worst of Dusty as well. Like with the older kids, you know, he had his flaws where he, you know, didn't spend as much time with them. With the younger ones, got the time and got like everything, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I don't even I sort of gained this. That's sort of how I went into it. Was like, oh, you know, Dusty learned and did better the second time, and like, isn't that great? But I have like an inordinate amount of appreciation and respect for the Dusty who grew up on the wrong side of the tracks in Austin and had the confidence and took the risk to leave to find something better for himself. And, you know, in a different cut of the film, we kind of went into what was happening in America. You know, America's coming out of the Great Depression, and, you know, like it was this, you know, idea that everybody should be doing better and achieving more. And he wasn't, you know, in an area where there were a lot of examples of people doing that. His dad was like, I don't think they were like dirt poor. His dad was a plumber. He was a pretty successful plumber, but they were surrounded by people who were struggling. And his, you know, the balls to leave Austin and go chase, you know, he had sports options, and to go do that. Well, you know, yeah, when you're a punk ass kid and, you know, you got a baby at home and whatever, you know, maybe you're not playing out all the, you know, dad implications and how that impacts somebody's life. And it can appear selfish, but it was also like, he went out and did that to provide for his family. And, you know, Dustin and Kristen, like, went to private school, all through elementary school. Like Dusty made sure that they were always taken care of, and they had a tough run. I'm not minimalizing the struggle that Dustin and Kristen had and how they didn't have a dad and they were in some tough situations. But, I don't think Dusty was ever like a deadbeat dad in the real definition of it. He made trade-offs and choices, and I think later in life he realized that he missed out on something, and he made the choice to start working behind the scenes and to focus on living in one place and having a family. And I think that was probably as hard a decision and choice for him, to accept and do as leaving was, 25 years earlier.
Yeah, no, true. And then to be fair, like to Dustin and Kristen, they admit there was faults, but they don't ever hold that against him, and they say he was a wonderful father as well. So like I like that fact that it's not this like beat like that. And I'm sure you said it as well. They didn't want to beat it down or have this whole negativity towards it as well.
No, but I think you see in both of them, there's a sadness, that I think Dustin still feels like, his life would have been better if he had had his dad around when he was younger. And I think Kristen feels like her life would be better if her dad was around now. And both of those things are because they didn't get the time with him. And that's kind of the other like totally relatable thing that has nothing to do with wrestling and a story that, I felt comfortable telling, which is like, I got a certain amount of time, and we all have to deal with that.
Yeah, no. And you touched on the early parts of his life there, like the Great Depression, things like that. Was there a cut that was longer and had a lot more early portions of his life? Because I was gonna say, everyone I've talked to so far who's done these A&E biographies, they're like, yeah, we had this cut that was like 30 minutes before we even got into wrestling, and we talked about this, and but obviously time.
The hardest job, the hardest part of my job and our editors, Eric Barchi and Colin Cossack, like is trying to focus in on what the story is and trying to not include even things that you love. It's like the Four Horsemen, you could do a whole show on the Four Horsemen and them attacking him and the Cadillac and, David Crockett putting the cameraman in there who's explaining like why they're doing it. There's just so many great things. And so we had a lot of that stuff was in there. And I've seen some comments online about, where was this and where was that? And for the most part, all of that stuff was in at some point.
Yeah.
But you to keep it in, you have to lose something else. And those choices are really hard. So yeah, I think we had at one point probably a solid 3-hour like layout.
Wow.
And maybe still an act or two still to go, because we didn't shoot this family scene until late fall. So we had major time problems, and we had to really like look at it and focus and say what were the most important things that happened at Jim Crockett. It's like, how about his relationship with Magnum TA? Like, it's just kind of an assumption that they were close, but we had a whole, he was such a great interview and such a great guy, and he and Dusty were so close. And Eddie Graham, like the sequence we had where Dusty talked about losing Eddie Graham and how he processed that, it was tremendous. I just don't know that it furthered the larger story of Dusty's life and the choices he made. It was sort of like, yeah, Eddie Graham was really influential in creating opportunities for him and putting him under his wing and making him who he became, at Championship Wrestling from Florida. But, Eddie Graham died because he had a lot of troubles that had nothing to do with Dusty. Mm-hmm. And it impacted Dusty, very deeply, very personally. He's, gave a lot of his time and money to, suicide prevention and awareness. But was that more important than, like polka dot? I don't, so.
Yeah, no, I was so impressed with how you guys weaved it together, and I mean, and I know it's always a struggle with cutting things out, and how it comes together is incredibly impressive, and I think it works. It's probably as good as it could have been done, like with touching on everything you need to, and as well as all the family stuff. Like unless you had obviously 3-4 hours.
You're very kind. That is really, really nice to say. You're never satisfied, you're never happy. And, we had to make changes, some changes at the end that were, difficult. And I'll tell you, the time in the space from, delivering the show at the end of last year and then the few months that went by really was a nice space to sit down and watch it air the other night and take a step back and say, hey, wow, it looked good, it felt good. And then hearing people's comments have just been so nice.
No, and well deserved. One of the things obviously you had is obviously, of course, you had Cody involved, but he said in an interview, and I remember him saying even last year after WrestleMania when he came back, a big, not I don't know if it's the biggest part, but a part of why he came back to WWE was this film. Like, when did you realize that your film is almost changed the tide of, helped change the tide of the whole wrestling business? Because Cody coming back to WWE was massive. Like, it has changed so much the momentum of WWE and everything that's happened since. I mean, when did that realization hit you that you've just almost changed an industry almost?
Well, it hit me kind of like a truck, and I didn't even know it was coming, and I didn't even understand how big the truck was. So that, going back to your first question about how does a guy who doesn't know a lot about wrestling, start? Well, the first, once I started the project and we got the full green light, my first call, because I was told like, hey, the family's generally okay to be involved. And you should probably start by, reaching out to Cody. So I was like, okay. So, I texted him. I didn't hear back, for a couple days. And, meanwhile, I'm still, I was still in the process of reading Dusty's book. Like, I hadn't done all my research yet, but I definitely wanted to connect with him to just figure out how much he was going to be involved and what the deal was. And I was like, started to get like kind of annoyed. Like, I'm like, why isn't this guy like writing back, And I go online and like, he had literally, like, the day I texted him was the day that he left AEW. and I'm like looking on Google, I was like, oh, he because I knew the AEW thing was going to be like a challenge, because it was like, you can work with Cody, but he's at AEW, but we think it's okay. There'll be some, you'll be allowed to put him in the film, but maybe. And so I was like, all right, cool. So then I was like, wow, so he left AEW. And I was like, oh. And then there was this window where it was like he left, but nobody knew what he was doing. And he called me back and I got on the phone with him, and it was like still not, I don't think it was still like done. Things were still very up in the air. And he was very honest with me and said, hey, like, the doc, like, I'm happy to help out. These are the things I think, that would be nice to have in it. I kind of gave him my thoughts about, really incorporating the family. And he was like, unsure, but he was definitely not like, it wasn't like he was like locked and loaded with WWE. He was not, as far as I knew, an executive producer. Dustin was, I hadn't spoken to him. I didn't have his number. He was at AEW, so that was a conflict. So it was very much a gray area. And, over the next several weeks, things started coming more into picture. And I'd heard that one of the things that he really wanted, if he was going to go to WWE, was he wanted to be involved on this project. And I think, it says a lot about, Cody. I mean, Cody, at the end of the day, is like very businesslike, right? And the way he dresses and the way he approaches the business. But he's also, very protective, and really wants to, he believes he's, a key member of wrestling's royal family. And he wanted to, have a voice in that. And I think it says a lot about him, because I think you get to that point in your career, like you're looking for a huge payday, you're looking for a title, you're looking for some security for your new family. And he had the wisdom and the courage to actually also want to be involved creatively. And he ended up being a great partner.
Oh, that's great to hear, and pretty wild. I can't imagine what you must have been like. Just the almost, I don't know if you were on edge, but like the uncertainty would have freaked me out, I think, or put me on nerves. But my nerves would have been heightened. Sorry.
No, it was awful. Because then even when he was, it was like became clear to me that he was, with WWE, and that, there was going to be a moment at WrestleMania. Um, you know, I I couldn't I couldn't tell anybody, and so I'm like doing interviews with people, and unable to really talk about what, so it was. And then, Dustin was still at AEW, like, getting him on board was hard, and then so it was touch and go for a while. And I think that if I reflect on it now, it really provided a respect and appreciation for what this is, and that I maybe didn't have when I showed up.
Yeah.
People care more than, the biggest Patriots fan, or Las Vegas Raiders fan in the world does not have the level of commitment to their team that a wrestling fan has to the sport overall.
Yeah.
It's just not even close, and so I really started to understand that when I saw the interest, when he was, the worst kept secret in history before that WrestleMania. But people, they cared so much, they wanted it. And that was a real eye opener, and sort of set the tone for how I, moved forward and sat down to talk with guys like, like Magnum TA, or, Hulk Hogan, or whoever. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it was a weird time, and it was a cool time to be a part of. And, I feel very fortunate.
Yeah, you were part of wrestling history. Yeah, and I mean, I feel like looking at it now though, it would have been really different, and maybe not. It wouldn't. The documentary in it, and obviously it's about Dusty, but so it sounds really weird to say this, but the film would have not had the same effect or impact had it not been almost kickstarted with Cody coming back to WWE and having that WrestleMania moment. Like that felt like, because it was WrestleMania, he was coming back. It was in Texas. He had that phone call with his mum and talking about how Dusty would be so proud. And it felt really heightened and grand. And then it set the template for this whole thing. And obviously then it comes back to it at the end as well. So it just felt bigger. And obviously you would have had Cody in anyway, I assume, but it just had a whole different feel for me. I don't know if you feel the same.
Oh, so it'll really let you in on a thing here. So my original idea was Dakota, Dustin's daughter,
Yeah.
was getting married that week. And how I saw the film opening was like her wedding,
Oh wow.
which would have been the first time that the whole family would have been together in one place since Dusty passed. And it would have been this like joyous occasion, a wedding, and everybody come together. And Dakota did some really nice things to honor Dusty at the wedding. There were like, yellow flowers, an empty seat, that had yellow napkins. And so I was moving forward trying to set up like, is there a way for me to come and shoot this wedding, but not be annoying and like ruin the wedding? And, Dustin was like not that into it. And, but I was like moving forward because I thought that would be a kind of a cool way to start the film, introduce the characters, and then go back and, tell the story from the beginning. That wedding was the day of WrestleMania. We
Wow.
didn't know which we didn't know if he was definitely going to be coming back at WrestleMania until like a couple weeks before. And then we didn't know what day he was going to be wrestling at WrestleMania. So up until a few days before, there was a possibility that Cody was going to go to the wedding on Saturday and then wrestle at WrestleMania on Sunday. So I'm like, was trying to like, how am I going to do that? Because then it would be like both things, and like that would be cool too. And so, but what ended up happening is he wrestled on Saturday, and the wedding was Saturday. So he couldn't do both. And then it was like, well, so then is his family's going to be at the wedding? Like his mom's not going to go to WrestleMania? Like, and this just says a lot about Michelle, who, like, Dustin's not her son, quote unquote. She's not Dakota's grandmother by the traditional definitions, but she is. She 100% is. And I think, I don't know that she really struggled. Like, she knew how important that wedding would have been to Dusty, and she knew how important it was to Dustin and Dakota, and she was there. And that phone call, which, in the film doesn't take a major role in terms of where his mom is at, like that's where she was.
I just assumed she was somewhere near WrestleMania. That was my assumption.
She's at Dakota's wedding. She's literally at the wedding.
Wow.
And people at that wedding, some people like were watching WrestleMania, in the reception, on Peacock on their phone. And again, it's like the stuff we couldn't put in the film, but like if you really boil into that, it says so much about Dusty, right? Like, not only is this huge moment happening, with his youngest son and his return to the WWE, but at the same time, the son who had all these troubles, whatever, his daughter's getting married, and like the whole family's there. Cody's sister Teal is at the wedding. Nobody was at WrestleMania.
Yeah.
And so anyways, that's the long version of
no, that's fascinating. That's fascinating. I would have never guessed. Like, and what are the bloody odds that that aligns that way? It's crazy. I mean, I also want to know, like, what kind of insight and like requirements almost did Cody have for you? Like, working with Cody, like, I'm assuming he was kind of like probably certain things he was like, no, we have to do this, or this.
Cody was, first of all, he completely supported what we wanted to do. And he was hands off in the beginning to let me get started and let me learn the story. I did the first interview I did with Cody. I mean, I watched it back in the edit, and I was just so ashamed of myself, confusing, All or Nothing with Battleground, and just, like not having my story totally straight. And he was just so gracious and kind and patient for hours with me. And that first interview really became the backbone for the film, because he was so great. And when I'd say something stupid, he would gently and kindly correct me. And again, this goes back to what I was saying about the difference between going and doing a feature on the Patriots and going and shooting with someone. Like, there's such commitment to the process and the time. And so he was super patient. Requirements, he wanted to make sure that people understood that his dad was his coach, and that he was his fan, and that he was like dad. He was a husband to his mom. He wasn't this carny who was traveling around every weekend and on this, road show hyping up his ego. He was home. And, that was important to him, because I think he felt that the previous, projects had sort of painted this Dusty left everybody behind and he wasn't a great dad. And I think that was really important to him. And, we did a decent job at that without overdoing it. And then, I think Cody also wanted to make sure that this project did not tear the family apart. You know, they've been through a lot, and I think they're still healing and they're still grieving Dusty not being around. And he just did not want to be a part of something that was going to continue doing that. And it took a long time for him to believe that we didn't want to do that either. And it's hard, right? It's a
Yeah.
fine line when you start talking about some of the things that have happened to that family. You know, it's there's got to be some baggage, and who am I to show up and tell that story? So I think he just, much like, you know, Dark Side of the Ring or whatever, like he did not want a project to come out and just create any more, you know, scar tissue that's already there. And I would say the one thing that I'm probably most proud of is I do think the process of making the film has brought the family a little bit closer together. And I think that I think it took a lot of the air out of some of the pressure that still is between, you know, the family. And I'm super proud of that. And I think Cody is really happy about that. And he was a huge part of making sure that happened.
Yeah, no, and it comes across that way, and and as I said at the beginning, it's incredibly emotional, and like Cody's interviews are some of the highlights. You know, when he gets how emotional he gets and how much he cares, it's really touching. And I mean, I wanted to, because there's something I heard. I'm a big fan of Indian cinema, and there's a big star by the name of Shah Rukh Khan there, and someone recently described Shah Rukh Khan as, they said he's an emotion. And for me, that almost encapsulates Dusty Rhodes. Like, if it's hard to describe what he is, but he's he feels like an emotion. Like, you feel Dusty Rhodes, and the documentary being just so emotional and having so many moments where you see tears coming down these people's faces, and how much he, you know, he touches you, like, you know, like in terms of the Black community, talking about how much they inspired us, how Dusty inspired them. Dusty really does feel like like an emotion, and I'm not sure if this is so much a question from me, but or maybe if you maybe share that sentiment.
You know, I think you're spot on. And I think that what really, the coolest thing about Dusty is, you know, everybody has their own relationship with Dusty, and how that, you know, whether it's it's a person of color who Dusty made, you know, wrestling seem more accessible and more comfortable. Whether it's, you know, Dave Zirin, who is like, you know, like a successful journalist and, like, you know, in real sports and all that stuff. And he basically, when I called him to ask him if he wanted to be, you know, take part in this, he was just like, the fact that you're calling me, the fact that somebody's doing a doc on Dusty Rhodes, like, means I did not waste my time as a child chasing something that didn't matter. It actually mattered. And it, like, validated his, you know, super nerd status as a kid or whatever. Like, and everybody connects to a different part. And so, you know, yeah, Dusty's emotion, but you can't tell me what that emotion is, right? Is the Dusty makes me laugh and he reminds me of my dad's laugh. Like, okay, that's real. You know, Dusty, you know, is the sadness of, you know, all the things that he's gone through and him being gone. That's an emotion. He represents so many emotions, and everybody's connection to him is slightly different, but as intense, like across many different emotions. And
Yeah.
there's not a lot of things like that where, you know, if everybody likes the same song, you know, they probably like the same part of the song. They like the lyrics, or they like the guitar solo, or they like, you know, you could pretty much name like what part of the song everybody really likes. But everybody likes Dusty Rhodes for different reasons, and they feel something totally different.
Yeah. No, that's a beautiful stories to hear as well. Just two more questions, Rob. I have to ask you this. You obviously dived into Dusty's whole life and career. What's your favorite Dusty promo?
Oh, that is a really, really hard one. Favorite Dusty promo. Oh, it may.
I put you on the spot. I'm sorry.
I know. And the problem is, if I say my favorite promo is not in the film, I'll never live it down. I mean, it's cliche. There's something about Hard Times. I mean,
Yeah.
when I first saw the Hard Times promo, and I was very new in my wrestling, life, and I was like, holy shit, like this dude, like he's talking about real issues. He's talking about like what year is this again? It's okay, 85. Okay, and I like ran into my, my bedroom and like showed it to my wife, and she was like, is this real?
Yeah.
Right? And it's like, I mean, I'm watching it. It certainly looks real. She's like, he seems so serious. Like I thought this was going to be fun. And I'm like, it's also hysterical. Like, look at his outfit. Like, isn't this great? And like I watched it again, and it's like it's so good on so many levels. You could have a team of stylists and writers and people, and you could not nail something as well as he nails that. So I'm gonna go with Hard Times just because I'll be crucified if I don't. But there are so many. I mean,
Did you and the other question was, did you happen to watch any matches of Dusty, and anyone that stand out there that you were really fond of?
yeah, I mean the first, it's Starcade 83, and where Joe Frazier
Oh yes.
calls the match. I mean, this is another one where it's just like we showed a little bit of it, but we didn't tell the amazing story. They get this celebrity referee, Joe Frazier. He sees so much blood, he ends up calling the match. Dusty wasn't supposed to lose. He was supposed to win. He's like, can't believe what's going on. But like you watch that match, like that match encapsulates the difference between the WWF at the time and Crockett Promotions, which is that like it's real. Like the blood's real, the match is real. It has this like edge and energy that just can't be denied. And if you were like Vince McMahon watching that from New York, I think it would be like holy shit, we got to up our game a little bit, because it was pretty. And then the whole thing goes sideways.
Yeah.
which is
This question was, what was your biggest takeaway from this whole project? Like, what's, because especially coming from, like, as if you was to say an outsider, someone who wasn't a wrestling fan or anything, and then you immersed yourself in this, what's been your now, and now especially now in hindsight, it's now come out, it's released. What's the biggest takeaway from this project?
That's a really hard one, because I think there's two. For me personally, it's that you think but you don't ever know. And people think like, oh, the older you get or the more experience you gain, you should become more confident about your assumptions and opinions and your gut instinct and these things that you think and I thought I knew what wrestling was, and I had no idea, and I was blown away by what it is and what it means to so many people and its place in American history, in entertainment, in sports. People talk about, oh, is it real and it's fake and da 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 da. It's like, Hugh Jackman, performing the Music Man every night with the exact same steps and the exact same songs he didn't write, in a play that, the director died, 40 years ago. You're going to argue that that's somehow less, demanding or more important or more creative than what these guys do on a nightly basis, and what these companies do in terms of their storylines and the productions and the performances. Like, I mean, I don't think Hugh Jackman gets hurt doing that, right? He doesn't, it's the same thing every single night. But yet somehow that's held in a higher regard. And I think I came to this with that, that misunderstanding. And I think that's the takeaway I have. And I think it's made me, have a new appreciation, not, just for wrestling and the people who have built up this sport from the beginning and continue to make it what it is. But it's also just impacted me on like maybe I should revisit heavy metal too, like, I made some, judgments about that along the way. And so, that would be the biggest takeaway that I took away personally. And I think the larger, like takeaway from the film is that you get one family. And, like you hate your brother. Sure, he's probably a jerk, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't do everything you can to try to, maintain that relationship. And, your dad maybe did some things to you that were not good, or left your mother or whatever, and he probably is not perfect. Like, I'm not a perfect father, but like still your dad and your mom. And, you should do what you can to try to understand and protect and celebrate those people.
Yeah. No, that's a beautiful thing, Rob, and I sincerely appreciate the time that you've given me today. It's been amazing to hear some of these stories, and just thank you again for the film, man. It was fantastic. Like, thus far, what I've seen this season, for me, I think it was, maybe because of the emotion drove it. It was maybe the best one.
Listen, it is my pleasure. I appreciate you having me, and there's nothing better than talking Dusty. So,
Yeah.
happy to do it anytime. And I appreciate what you're doing, because you are as much a part of this, as Cody or Dusty or anybody else. And I mean, that's the beauty of wrestling.
Thank you. And I'm going to leave you by saying my hand is touching your hand right now, Rob.
Awesome.
Thank you, Rob. Appreciate it.
Ciao.
Thank you.
And that was the chat with Robert Liano. Like I said, wonderful conversation. It may have been one of my favorite interviews. Rob was so giving, so gracious, so kind with his time and like kind of insight. And it was really a pleasure, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I hope you guys did too. I hope you learned. I hope you enjoyed another one of these great chats. I love talking to these filmmakers. Like I said, they're all so kind, so giving, and they do such wonderful work. And I feel like in an area like these documentaries, they're not always spotlighted as much as they should be. So I'm happy that I can do that for them in some capacity. Not that they need it, but it's nice to spotlight them and get their thoughts on the whole thing, because without them, these don't come to light in the way that they do. So yeah, that was another one in the can. Another great episode. I really hope you enjoyed it. And as always, please help your boy out. Help your favorite podcast out. Like and subscribe to the YouTube channel, the Wrestling and Film Podcast YouTube channel. Share this. Give the audiences out there insight, updates about this podcast. And I'll see you in the next episode. Peace out. Daddy.